Recognized as the father of pro stock drag racing, Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins knew how to get power out of a Chevrolet. Ranked number 8 on the NHRA's top 50 drivers of all time, he was known as a tuner and would go on to have 30 cars set national records wearing his logo. Jenkins was your local drag racer's favorite drag racer, and in this video we'll go over exactly who Jenkins really was and all of the cars he would make known. Born on December 22, 1930 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to an architect father and a stay-at-home mom, the Berwyn Bandit would never settle any further than 40 miles out from his hometown. Grumpy's mechanical interest started in his early teens by repairing tractors and farm equipment. Before he was even able to drive, the young Jenkins would purchase a Ford Model A as his first car, something that would quickly change. By the time he graduated high school in 1949, he would write in his yearbook to watch out for the Jenkins Chevrolet. After graduating grade school, he would attend Cornell University during the early 1950s to be a mechanical engineer. However, after his father's passing, he would drop out of school and head back home to begin racing sometime in 1953. Always fascinated by the automobile, Jenkins would enter a raffle back home and luckily win a new 1951 Chevrolet. Unsatisfied and armed with his formal and non-formal mechanical knowledge, he would modify the stock 216 inline-six until she would eventually give out. After swapping the engine for a newer 235, his friend encouraged him to test the car in Manassas, Virginia, where on a dirt road Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins would make his very first run, eventually going on to win his class. After returning home with a newfound love and admiration for drag racing, he would take a job at Usher Oldsmobile in order to learn everything he could. As a 23-year-old, he would also rent a few garage spaces, opening up what we now know today as Jenkins Competition. In the second half of 1954, Chevrolet would unveil their new 265 cubic inch small block V8. Enamored with the new high-revving technology, Grumpy would trade in his 51 car for a new shoebox 55. Always forward-thinking, he also installed a camshaft from a Corvette, increasing the horsepower of the already power pack-equipped car. It was during this time that in Lancaster and Allentown, Pennsylvania, the local airstrips would allow Jenkins and other local drag racers to hold competitions. During 1956 and 1957, he would take a job as a tech inspector for a few of the local tracks. He would inspect the cars before they raced to ensure they ran the correct class, and with his mechanical prowess learned from racing himself, it was tough to pull one over on the Grump. It's been said that in 1956, Jenkins wrote the rules for the Eastern Hot Rod Association by changing the way the classes were formed. The director of the NHRA at the time ended up adopting these new classifications and would foster in what we know today as superstock and pro stock drag racing. In 1959, as fate would have it, Bill Jenkins would meet Dave Strickler. Strickler was also a local racer who got his start in the automotive community tinkering with old Chevrolets. After bringing his 59 to Jenkins' shop for tuning, he would end up winning his class that very same weekend, and the two would spark a successful relationship in the years to follow. The duo's cars in drag racing are considered to be some of the holy grails and are instrumental in early drag racing history. During a 2007 interview, Jenkins was asked out of all of the cars he owned and raced, which one he would like to have most back. His answer was the first car that would really garner him and Strickler national attention, and was really the car that started it all, the very first Old Reliable. Starting life as a 1961 Biscayne 409 backed up by M&R Smith, who sponsored the pair, as well as one of the founding Chevrolet dealerships. It originally was a Honduras maroon car that would read M&R Smith's slogan, or the Old Reliable, in white lettering down the side. Also outfitted with a white hood and a scoop, it is thought that the hood was scavenged from a local junkyard, with Jenkins not being able to butcher the one from stock. The car would sport the new W motor, or the 409, one of only 142 Biscaynes with the 409 built that year. In the fall of 1961, Strickler and Jenkins would compete and win in the NHRA's regional championship at York Dragway, where the car would set a national record of 13.24 seconds. The Old Reliable 1 would become the very first car that officially put Bill Jenkins and Dave Strickler into the big leagues of drag racing. The car was then sold off to a racer named John Thornton after the season, and today the whereabouts of the original Old Reliable are still unknown. With the newfound recognition, he would find success tuning cars during the off-season, adding some much-needed stability in his life. In 1962, Strickler and Jenkins would receive a brand new Chevrolet Bel Air, or the Old Reliable 2, and race the car competitively across the country, winning the NHRA's National Superstock Honors at Indy that year. The number 201 on the side referred to M&R Smith's dealership address located on Carlisle Avenue in York, which the team used when it was drag racing locally. The Bel Air that year would race along the Impala, and during the summer of 1962, Chevrolet would celebrate their 50th anniversary, and M&R Smith would procure one of the new Copo aluminum nose Impalas. They had aluminum fenders, inner fender liners, and an aluminum hood. The 1962 Impala also had a mysterious top end featuring some experimental Chevrolet components called the Mark II service package. These changes to the stock car would lead it to be featured in the experimental class, finishing runner-up at Nationals to Dyno Don Nicholson, who ran a similar Impala. The car would be considered too heavy, and it was ultimately stripped for its aluminum parts. M&R Smith would then sell the car, and then it's thought to be somewhere currently down south. As the world would take notice, Strickler and Jenkins would only race a big-body Chevrolet for one more year. The new Old Reliable 4 is today considered the most famous of the Strickler and Jenkins run. With the unsatisfactory results of the 1962 Impala, it is thought that for the new year, the Pennsylvania racers would receive the very first 1963 Z11 manufactured by Chevrolet. These cars were designed specifically to dominate the local drag strips by being covered in lightweight body components. All Z11 started out as a non-SS model, and the 409 was modified to accommodate the new larger 427 cubic inch rule. By January 1963, Chevrolet had met the requirements for the Z11 cars to run in the NHRA Superstock class, and it was during this time that drag racing was gaining popularity on TV. The Old Reliable 4 would go on to terrorize the country by winning more than 90% of its races in 1963, beating everyone and winning the Little Stock Eliminator title that same year. The car still exists today and was sold off to a new owner after spending time in one of the best early drag racing collections for years. Chevrolet would end up banning all racing efforts in 1963. For the 1964 season, Strickler and Jenkins would end up striking a deal with Chrysler, campaigning a 425 horsepower, 426 cubic inch Stage 3 Max Wedge Polara. The team at Chrysler was fascinated by Jenkins, hoping to capitalize on the endorsement of possibly the nation's top drag racing tuner. The efforts to get him to sign on the deal would be wasted in true grumpy fashion, and he would let Strickler sign and receive payments. It is thought that Jenkins did not want to ruin his relationship with Chevrolet. Although somewhat successful, the Polara would end up losing to the Ford Thunderbolts as the year went on, and the car was sold in favor of the new AFX model powered by the new 426 Hemi. The Dodge Boys cars, as it was known, would run alongside the Chrysler sponsor racer from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, Bud Fauble, and continue their dominant run. Fauble, who befriended Jenkins in 1961, received the first publicly available 426 Hemi and would race the car known as the Hemi Honker. Jenkins would get familiar with the new hemispherical combustion engine, and in 1964, Fauble would go on to win over 200 races and win Driver of the Year. Thanks, all in part to the now famous black and yellow logos down the side. For the 1965 season, Jenkins would take a new approach. Not signed by Chrysler, he would end up preparing a car for a guy named Doc Burgess. Purchased through Fauble's dealership in Pennsylvania, the car was a 1965 A990 Belvedere, one of the 101 race cars from Plymouth, right out of the box. With no name for the car, Jenkins would call it the Black Arrow after his father's sailboat and debut the car against his friend Dave Strickler at Cecil County Dragway. Jenkins would go on to pilot the lightweight Hemi-powered car to a win, and then go on to win his first national Top Stock Eliminator event title at Pomona later that year. It is in a Chrysler, not a Chevrolet, that Jenkins would first truly be uplifted and recognized as a driver. This in turn led to what we know today as Grumpy's Toys, or the cars that would take over drag racing in the late 1960s. For 1966, Jenkins would run his own cars, starting with the 1966 Chevy 2 Nova painted in regal red. The car was a L79 327 small block rated at 350 horsepower and was purchased through a deal with his old pals at M&R Smith. This is the car that Grumpy would test and tune the small block to compete against the Hemi. He would return week after week, trying different combinations to get the most out of the little engine car. With the small block now rated at 450 horsepower, Jenkins would capture the attention of the top brass at Chevrolet, who on a handshake deal would supply parts for Jenkins years down the line. Unfortunately, Grumpy's Toy 1 would fall victim to Jerry Stahl's Hemi at Nationals that year. It is thought, however, that the car may have been illegal and had the motor swapped out the day before. On the way back home to Pennsylvania, on the turnpike, Grumpy's Toy 1 was totaled in an accident, with Jenkins managing to save only the drivetrain. The search began for Toy 2, and finding another L79 wouldn't be easy. Jenkins would pull through and manage to procure another car through a friend named Roger Penske, just in time to pull off a few more victories before the end of the season. Grumpy's Toy 2 was sold in the spring of 1967 and is rumored to still be out there today. With the rules and classifications changing for the new 1967, Grumpy would take delivery of one of the first L78 396 Camaros. After encouragement from Chevrolet, Grumpy's Toy 3 would be stripped of some parts and prepared for drag racing. The 67 Camaro came with a monoleaf spring and produced extreme wheel hop when doing burnouts. Jenkins fabricated a bolt-on rear traction bar system with a hard rubber snub, proving to be very useful. He also allowed Lakewood Industries to market them as traction action bars. Toy 3 fell into the NHRA's Superstock C-Class and frequently won. At the biggest race that year, the 1967 NHRA Nationals, Jenkins swept the Superstock Eliminator title, earning him another career-defining win. Toy 3 would serve Grumpy for many years after the 1967 season as a match racer and is sometimes confused with the 68 after it wore an RS front end. Ownership of the car is entirely known, and today it resides in a very unique private collection. It is known that in 1968, Jenkins would run 4 cars. He ran his Toy 3, Toy 4, Toy 5, and Dave Strickler's 1968 Z28 Old Reliable Camaro. Toy 5 was a 1968 Nova that originally was a test mule for Chevrolet. It was given to Grumpy in hopes of boosting sales, and at the World Finals that year, he would drive the Nova in favor of his Toy 4 Camaro, who would lose to the Old Reliable Z28. Grumpy's 1968 Chevy 2 Nova was then sold at the end of the season to a guy in the Northeast, supposedly burning down in a garage fire later on. Toy 3 and Toy 4 would go on to race in the 1969 season, along with the new Toy 6 1969 Camaro. Toy 6 was considered to be ineligible to compete in competition. This, of course, was due to the lack of confirmed ZL1 sales, despite the car never being one. In 1970, Grumpy's Toy 4, or his 1968 RS front-end Camaro, would go on to win the very first NHRA Pro Stock race, as well as set a record time of just under 10 seconds. Many things have been said about what happened to this car and its overall history. Grumpy's Toy 4 was not in fact a 68 Camaro at all. It was originally an early 1967 Z28 that was acid-dipped by Penske for road racing. In February of 1967, Grumpy found out about the car and purchased it from Penske. Jenkins would go on to win several championships between 1967 and 69 with the mill car, according to the executor of Grumpy's estate. The car was never really actually raced as a 1967 Camaro. Originally acid-dipped, it was considered something that would be deemed illegal and a fact that Grumpy would never want known. After all, he did earn his nickname for being a strict tech inspector. In 1971, Jenkins would go winless. When the rules were changed in 1972, allowing drivers with a small block wedge engine to run a lighter car, he would choose a Vega and go on to win 5 of the very first 8 events and 6 of the 8 nationals. Jenkins would go on to earn $250,000 that year and match Wilt Chamberlain as the highest paid professional athlete in the United States. He is considered the first drag racer to experience mainstream national coverage and would go on to race in tuned engines until he passed away in 2012. Jenkins is immortalized and enshrined in pretty much every single motorsports Hall of Fame, and his early cars are considered some of the most important of their time. One thing's for sure about Bill Grumpy Jenkins, and that's that he made the sport he loved far better than when he found it.